Hey, what's up guys, it's Lujo, and I ranked every MVP in NFL history. And when I say every, I mean every single one. The MVP was first awarded in 1957, and it is given to the best NFL player in the league. Well, not the best NFL player, but the most impactful, the most valuable player in the league. Actually, it's basically just the most popular offensive player, which most of the time happens to be a quarterback. In fact, less than half of the QBs that have won the MVP came first in Offensive Player of the Year voting that same season. It's kind of a rigged award, however, it's the most popular one, and if you truly had one of the best seasons ever, you would win the MVP. I forgot to mention, I'll talk about some dudes more than others, because some guys just aren't that interesting. Also, who do you think will win MVP? It seems pretty clear that it's either Matt Stafford or Drake May. Personally, I think Drake May deserves it, but Matt Stafford was already the first-team All-Pro quarterback, and I think he's going to win it. If he was on this list, he'd probably be in the mid to high 20s for the great season he has had. Now, how did I rank the MVPs? Well, first off, I compared them to other players at their position, and then I combined all those rankings into one list. So I'd compare them statistically, as well as looking at their overall impact on their teams and the percentage of first place votes they got. Overall, I think my list is pretty fair, and I haven't really seen a good one in a while. So let's rank every MVP in NFL history. In last place, it's the fucking kicker that won MVP. In 1982, Mark Mosley of the Redskins won the MVP, and he was a kicker. While he had a solid season, there was absolutely no reason for him to win the MVP. It's just a laughable fun fact, and it really shouldn't have happened ever. Right above him in second to last place is Paul Hornung's 1961 season. Hornung had less than 600 yards this season, and while he did play in a different time, Jim Brown was also playing, and he was putting up way more yards than that. At 66 is John Elway's 1987 season. Looking back at the season, his numbers were very poor, especially for an MVP winner, and he was the second-team All-Pro at quarterback behind Joe Montana. How are you the second best QB in the league and also the greatest player in the league? I couldn't tell you. At 65 is Steve McNair from 2003. Now, he was a co-winner with Peyton Manning, and he was also a second-team All-Pro behind Peyton and finished 5th in Offensive Player of the Year voting. His stats weren't that amazing either. At 64 is the first ever MVP winner, Jim Brown's 1957 season. He had less than 1,000 yards, and he had many other better seasons than this. Still though, even with 900 yards, he led the league in yards and touchdowns. At 63 is Earl Morrall in 1968, and at 62 is Johnny Unitas from 1967. At 61 is the most recent winner, and that's Josh Allen from 2024. Again, Josh Allen wasn't even the first team All-Pro, he was the second team All-Pro behind Lamar Jackson. He did lead the league in QBR, but he was 6th in Offensive Player of the Year voting. It's not like he had a bad season, but he didn't really deserve the MVP. At 60 is Terry Bradshaw's 1978 season. Now, a lot of people say Terry Bradshaw is just one of the luckiest QBs ever because of how good his team was. Still, though, he was the leader of the team, and while his numbers don't look that great, I don't think this team's winning without him. At 59 is John Brodie from 1970, and then above him is Rich Gannon. Now, Rich Gannon had one of the weirdest careers ever, becoming really good when he was already really old. And don't get me wrong, he had a nice season, but his numbers really don't hold up that much. Above him is Joe Montana's 1990 season. Montana only threw 26 touchdowns compared to 16 interceptions and only won 33% of first place MVP votes. He kind of just wanted the season off of his name. At 56 is Roman Gabriel, who won it in 1969, and above him is Larry Brown, who won it in 1972, and is probably the most forgotten player that won an MVP. Larry Brown had just over 1,200 rushing yards, but he was also a pretty decent threat in the pass game. I don't think he deserves to be as forgotten as he is. Above him is Boomer Esiason, the winner in 1988. He transformed this Bengals team and was an electric player. Again, his numbers don't really hold up that much, but he did lead the league in QB rating and was on one of the most exciting teams that year. At 53 is Brett Favre's 1997 season. This was by far his weakest MVP season, and it was his 3rd straight. However, at this point, he didn't really deserve it. He was just kind of giving it. At 52 is Brian Sipe from 1980, and then at 51 is one of 2 defensive players to win it, Alan Page. Now, they didn't track tackles back then, but Alan Page was clearly the best defensive player. He won the Defensive Player of the Year and caused 2 safeties. He finished the season with 9 sacks as a defensive tackle. At 50 is Johnny Unitas from 1959, and at 49 is also Johnny Unitas from 1964. Then we got Fran Tarkenton from 1975, right above them, and he has very similar stats to the dude ahead of him, which is Ken Stabler from 1974. Then at 46 is Peyton Manning from 2003. He won co-MVP this year with Steve McNair, and he was third in Offensive Player of the Year voting. His numbers weren't terrible, but it was clearly his worst season that he won MVP. Right above him is Joe Theismann from 1983, and then we have another Peyton Manning, this time from 2009. He threw a decent amount of picks this year, but he led the league with 7 fourth-quarter comebacks and 7 game-winning drives. At 43 is Ken Anderson's 1981 season, and then above him is Burt Jones's 1976. Then we got Peyton Manning again, this time from 2008. This year he actually won Offensive Player of the Year. At 40 is Brett Favre from 1996. He was second in Offensive Player of the Year voting, but had 39 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. At 39 is Kurt Warner from 2001. Fun fact, this is the most interceptions thrown in a season by an MVP winner with 22, and he was also second in Offensive Player of the Year voting. At 38, we have Lamar Jackson from 2023. He won 98% of first place votes, but he was fourth in Offensive Player of the Year voting. But he was a very efficient quarterback through the air and also the best quarterback on the ground. I don't understand how he's the fourth best offensive player though. I think that voting's just kind of off. At 37 is Emmitt Smith's MVP season from 1993. Now, while he is the all-time leader in rushing yards, his stats from this season are pretty disappointing in retrospect. And then above him is Thurman Thomas. Now, he had similar rushing stats, but Thurman Thomas was a way better asset through the air, making him rank higher. At 35 is 2017 Tom Brady. Now, he won 80% of first-place votes, but was third in Offensive Player of the Year voting. He threw 32 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. At 34 is Jim Taylor from 1962. Jim Taylor had just under 1,500 rushing yards, but led the league in every rushing category. At 33 is Aaron Rodgers from 2021. Now, his numbers were outstanding. He had almost 80% of first-place votes, but he was the fourth in Offensive Player of the Year voting. Right above him, we have Brett Favre's first MVP season, and this was actually the only MVP season he had, where he was also the Offensive Player of the Year. He had 38 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, and led the league in touchdowns and yards. At 31, we have Marcus Allen's 1985 season, and then Earl Campbell's 1979 season is right above him. Marcus Allen had a lot more yards, but Earl Campbell scored 5 more touchdowns. At 29 is Y.A. Tittle. He threw 36 touchdowns, which is very impressive, considering he did that in 1963. That broke the all-time record at that point. Above that, we have Steve Young's 1992 season. Now, Young took over the Niners, and people were surprised on how similar he was to Montana, at least in terms of skill. Steve Young had 70% of first-place votes, won the Offensive Player of the Year, and keeps the 49ers dynasty going. At 27 is Jim Brown's 1965 season. He led the league in yards, touchdowns, and rush yards per game, having over 1,500 rush yards and 17 touchdowns. Then at 26, we have Lawrence Taylor's 1986 season. It's kind of hard to figure out where to put him. I didn't want to put him too high. He had 20.5 sacks, but I didn't put him too high because he only won 49% of first-place votes. He obviously also won the Defensive Player of the Year. At 25, we have Bart Starr's 1966 season. Now, he only threw 14 touchdowns this season, but he also only threw 3 interceptions, and he led the Packers to winning their first Super Bowl, and also the first Super Bowl in NFL history. Then at 24, we have Kurt Warner's 1999 season. There was one website that said this was the best MVP season ever. It's safe to say that was a little biased, as Kurt Warner wasn't even the Offensive Player of the Year that year. It was his teammate Marshall Faulk. At 23 is Aaron Rodgers from 2014. Now, his numbers were stellar as always, but he's pretty low because he was also not the Offensive Player of the Year. Then we have Barry Sanders from 1997. He had over 2,000 rushing yards and 300 receiving yards. He just didn't score that many touchdowns compared to some of the other running backs. Above him, we have Steve Young from 1994. This year, he was better in almost every category compared to his first MVP season. And he also won the Super Bowl this season, throwing 9 touchdowns to 0 interceptions in the playoff run. At 20 is Terrell Davis from 1998. He had just over 2,000 rushing yards, but he had 21 touchdowns on the ground. And he's also a decent threat through the pass game, having over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns in the air. At 19 is Marshall Faulk from 2000. Now, Marshall Faulk was the ultimate dual threat. He had 1,300 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns on the ground, and then through the air he had 800 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns, having in total well over 2,100 yards and 26 touchdowns. Then at 18 is Shaun Alexander from 2003. He had over 1,800 rushing yards, but had 27 touchdowns, which broke the record at the time. And it's kind of unfair to Shaun Alexander because this rushing touchdown record would go on to be broken by 1 touchdown, kind of dropping Shaun Alexander down a decent amount of spots. At 17 is Matt Ryan from 2016. Yes, they lost in the Super Bowl, but basically up until the second half of that game, he was by far and away the best QB in the league. And then at 16, we have Jim Brown's 1958 season, where he had over 1,500 rushing yards and would get over 127 yards a game, which absolutely shattered every record back then. At 15 is Aaron Rodgers from 2020. Now, this dude also didn't win Offensive Player of the Year this year, but the man won 88% of first-place votes and threw 48 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. At 14, we have Joe Montana's 1989 season. His numbers weren't earth-shattering, but he's by far and away the best player in the league, winning Offensive Player of the Year and almost 90% of first-place votes. Then at 13, we have Walter Payton's 1977 season. We've seen better numbers, but in the era Walter Payton was playing in, this was one of the best seasons ever, and he was by far and away the best running back in the league. At 12, we have Aaron Rodgers from 2011, and this was his best season. He had 45 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, won the Super Bowl, won 96% of first-place votes, and still wasn't the Offensive Player of the Year. That is the only reason this is not in the top 10. And then we have another person tied with 12th, and it definitely wasn't because I forgot until this moment, and that is Patrick Mahomes' 2022 season. This is very similar to Rodgers, as he won 98% of first-place votes, but also wasn't the Offensive Player of the Year. Then at 11, right outside the top 10, is Patrick Mahomes again, this time from 2018. Now, he had 50 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, and he had over 5,000 yards, winning 82% of first-place votes and Offensive Player of the Year. However, it is just outside the top 10. At 10, we have Cam Newton's 2015 season. He was absolutely dominant through the air and through the ground this season, leading the Panthers to the Super Bowl. And I will say Cam is pretty lucky because just that one moment alone where he was quote-unquote scared to dive for the ball really should punish him, but I know if I keep him outside the top 10, people will not be very happy. At 9 is Tom Brady's 2010 season. He won 100% of first-place votes and the Offensive Player of the Year. However, his numbers aren't really as impressive as the seasons above him. At 8 is Lamar Jackson from 2019. He also won 100% of first-place votes, and he was very efficient through the air, but had the best rushing season from a quarterback ever, having over 1,200 yards, making him the best dual-threat quarterback of all time. At 7 is Adrian Peterson from 2012. Now, he had 2,097 rushing yards and only 12 touchdowns. But when you put it into perspective, this dude's quarterback was Christian Ponder. Literally, defense's only strategy was to stop him, and still he led the Vikings, who were terrible, to the playoffs. At 6 is O.J. Simpson's 1973 season. O.J. had over 2,000 rushing yards in 14 games. He also had the most yards per game ever in a season by a running back. Sadly, O.J.'s legacy is stained by false accusations. R.I.P. At 5 is Peyton Manning's 2004 season. He had 49 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, won 98% of first-place votes, and was the Offensive Player of the Year. At number 4, we have the highest-rated running back, and that is LaDainian Tomlinson from 2006. He had over 1,800 rushing yards and a record-breaking 28 touchdowns, as well as 500 yards through the air, having a scrimmage 2,323 yards and 31 touchdowns. All right, now we got the top 3. And in third, it's got to be Dan Marino's 1984 season. Now, this season was unbelievable at the time. The record for most touchdown passes in a season was 36 before the season. Marino had 48 passing touchdowns. He also had over 5,000 passing yards. That had never been done, and even today, that rarely happens. I mean, Matt Stafford is probably going to win the MVP. He is 300 yards shy of 5,000 yards. And while everybody who was alive back then, especially my dad, will tell you this was the best season ever, the truth is time has gone on, and I do think there is 2 seasons that have just outlasted this. The first of which, and second place, is Tom Brady's 2007 season. Now, I'm sure a lot of people probably thought this would be first, and I will say he has a pretty decent argument. He had 50 touchdowns, which was a record at the time, to 8 interceptions. He had the highest QBR ever in a season and won 98% of first-place votes, leading the league in basically every major category. He also led his team to being undefeated, well, up until the Super Bowl. And even though they lost the Super Bowl, people still say this is like the best team of all time. However, there is one season that is better in my eyes, and that is Peyton Manning's 2013 season. Now, okay, this Super Bowl performance was worse than Tom Brady's. However, before that, Peyton Manning set the all-time record for passing touchdowns and passing yards in the same season. He had 55 passing touchdowns to 10 interceptions with a 68.3 completion percentage and 5,477 passing yards, almost 700 more yards than Brady had. And he also led the league in basically every major category. Okay, the Super Bowl didn't go too well, but still, this was literally record-breaking, and I'm not sure this will ever be broken. Alright, that's the video. Thanks for watching. Tell me who you think's gonna win MVP. Lujo, out.